Outside, the low purr of a black luxury sedan broke the stillness. A chauffeur hurried to open the door, and out stepped a man in a tailored charcoal suit, his shoes gleaming like mirrors. He adjusted his cufflinks, then his gold watch, glancing around as if the city itself were his possession. Inside, the courtroom murmured with quiet chatter, the kind that always preceded something unexpected. The man's name was Daniel Reynolds, CEO of a multi-million-dollar real estate firm. He walked with the confidence of someone used to winning, each step echoing through the marble hallway like a declaration. As he entered, the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." Judge Caprio took his seat with the same calm authority that had filled this courtroom for decades. His eyes, steady but warm, followed Reynolds as he approached the bench. The CEO offered a faint smirk, one corner of his mouth lifting like he already knew the ending. Caprio nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as the man sat down. The charges were simple: parking violations, reckless driving, minor offenses on paper, but the tension in the air made them feel heavier. Reynolds crossed one leg over the other, tapping his pen against the table. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "I think there's been a bit of confusion. I'm sure we can sort this out quickly." His tone dripped with confidence, the kind born not from innocence, but from money. The audience exchanged glances. Caprio leaned back slightly, adjusting his glasses, letting the silence do its work. "You're here for 3 violations, Mr. Reynolds," he said evenly, one of which involves reckless driving through a crosswalk. Reynolds chuckled, shaking his head. "Ah, come on, Judge. I've got meetings that cost more than that fine. Let's be practical." A ripple of unease passed through the courtroom. Caprio didn't flinch. "Practicality," he repeated softly, his gaze steady. "We'll see about that." The room stilled. Reynolds grinned wider, mistaking calm for compliance. He turned toward the small crowd seated behind him, whispering, "Guess I'll be home before lunch." Caprio's eyes flicked to him again, gentle, knowing, yet unreadable. He glanced briefly toward the camera, then back to his papers, the faintest smile touching his lips. Somewhere in that silent exchange, the tone of the day shifted. The judge's expression said what words did not. This won't end the way he thinks. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier now, thick with the kind of tension that clings to pride. Daniel Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his confidence radiating like perfume, strong, unmistakable, and overbearing. The clerk began to read the charges again, but Reynolds cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Save us all some time," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I could probably just buy the city and wipe these tickets clean." His words hung in the air, sharp and arrogant. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the benches, but they died as quickly as they began. Judge Caprio didn't smile. He simply looked up, eyebrows slightly raised, as if studying a man who had no idea he was digging his own grave. Reynolds chuckled again, glancing toward the gallery. "I mean, really, Your Honor," he continued, "doesn't it seem a little beneath this court to spend time on parking tickets?" The clerk froze. The bailiff's jaw tensed. Even the camera crew hesitated. Caprio remained perfectly still. His calm was unsettling, measured, deliberate. "Mr. Reynolds," he said softly, "do you think the law is beneath you?" The CEO leaned forward, smirking. "No, Judge, not beneath me. Just negotiable." The words struck like thunder. A woman in the audience gasped. The sound of a pen dropping somewhere near the back echoed faintly. Caprio's gaze didn't waver. He folded his hands, resting them gently on the bench. "Negotiable," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's an interesting philosophy." Reynolds laughed again, trying to fill the silence. "It's how the world works, right? You've got to pay to play." His voice carried a mix of arrogance and insecurity, a performance rehearsed too many times in boardrooms. The judge leaned back, eyes never leaving him. "And what happens," he asked, "when the price isn't money?" Reynolds blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Excuse me." Caprio tilted his head. "When the cost is respect, dignity, integrity, what then?" The question landed like a stone in water, quiet, but rippling through everyone present. The CEO shifted in his seat, smirk faltering for the first time. Caprio didn't press further. He simply looked at him with that knowing calm, the kind that makes silence louder than any scolding. Reynolds tried to recover, muttering, "I didn't mean any offense." The judge gave a faint, almost sympathetic smile. "I'm sure you didn't." Then he turned to his clerk. "Let's continue." The courtroom exhaled collectively, but beneath the surface, the game had changed. The courtroom had quieted into an uneasy calm. The faint hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound between the pauses of Daniel Reynolds's monologue. He leaned on the podium like it was a stage, his voice confident, his words rehearsed. "You know, Judge," he said, gesturing toward the gallery, "when you've worked as hard as I have, success isn't luck, it's control. You control outcomes. You control people. That's how the world works." His tone was half boast, half sermon. The spectators shifted in their seats, sensing he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Caprio's pen moved slowly across the file before him, but his eyes never left Reynolds. He had seen this performance before, the armor of arrogance that cracks at the faintest touch of humility. When Reynolds paused to sip from his glass of water, Caprio spoke, his voice softer than expected. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, "you mentioned control. Tell me, when was the last time something didn't go your way?" Reynolds chuckled. "Oh, I make sure things do go my way, Your Honor. That's why I'm where I am." The judge nodded thoughtfully, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "And your family?" The question seemed to strike from nowhere. "Your wife, children, do they see the same man we see here?" The CEO hesitated, blinking as if the question had short-circuited his script. "My family's fine," he replied quickly. "They understand the sacrifices." Caprio's gaze softened. "Sacrifices," he repeated, his tone distant, reflective. "That word has two meanings. What we give up and what we give away." Reynolds frowned, unsure whether he was being lectured or understood. He shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. "Look, Judge, I didn't come here for a therapy session." Caprio raised a hand gently. "No, you didn't. But sometimes the truth walks in uninvited." The courtroom was still, the kind of stillness that made every breath audible. The CEO's confidence began to fracture, his eyes darting briefly to the floor before he straightened again, forcing a laugh. "You're a wise man, Judge. But this is just about tickets." Caprio's expression didn't change. "Nothing is ever just about tickets," he said softly. "It's about choices, and who we become while making them." For a moment, Reynolds looked almost small behind the defense table, his bravado slipping like a mask too heavy to hold. Caprio observed him quietly, allowing the silence to draw out the truth the man was trying to hide. Fear, not of fines or judgment, but of losing control. Then, with a calm steadiness, the judge turned to the clerk. "Let's hear from the officer who stopped you," he said. The tone of the room shifted instantly, like the wind before a storm. The courtroom door creaked as a young officer stepped forward, hat in hand, uniform crisp, but his posture uncertain. His nameplate read O. Daniels, and his voice trembled slightly when he spoke. "Good morning, Your Honor." Caprio nodded gently. "Good morning, Officer Daniels. Please, take your time." The officer glanced briefly toward the defendant's table, where Daniel Reynolds sat motionless, his trademark smirk flickering like a weak flame. Daniels inhaled deeply, steadying himself. "It was a Tuesday evening, around 6:30, he began. "Heavy traffic downtown. I was stationed near Pine and Broad when I saw a black sedan speeding up the lane." His words painted the scene with quiet precision. "There was an elderly man crossing, slowly, using a cane. The car didn't slow down. It swerved at the last second." The courtroom fell silent. Even the air seemed to pause. Caprio leaned forward slightly, hands folded, eyes narrowing. Not in anger, but in disappointment. "Did the vehicle stop?" he asked softly. Daniels hesitated. "Yes, sir." After the man stumbled back, frightened, the driver stopped for a moment, then rolled down his window. The officer's throat tightened. "He laughed, Your Honor." Gasps rippled through the benches. Reynolds shifted in his seat, jaw tightening, his earlier arrogance dissolving under the weight of the words. Caprio's gaze turned toward him, calm but cutting. "Is this accurate, Mr. Reynolds?" he asked. The CEO said nothing, his eyes fixed on the desk before him. The judge nodded toward the bailiff. "Play the footage." The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor came to life. The dashcam video flickered, a city street bathed in orange evening glow. The sedan burst into frame, horn blaring. An old man in a beige coat froze mid-crossing, his cane trembling. The car swerved, missing him by inches. The old man's mouth moved, shouting something unheard over the noise. The car window rolled down. A face leaned out, smirking, saying something dismissive before speeding away. The sound of tires screeching lingered like an echo of arrogance. When the lights came back up, no one spoke. Judge Caprio removed his glasses slowly, resting them on the bench. His voice was measured, almost tender. "Officer Daniels, who was the pedestrian?" The officer looked toward the back of the room. A frail hand lifted. The elderly man rose, leaning on his cane, his movements deliberate but dignified. He was in his 70s, dressed simply, eyes kind, yet weary. As he stepped forward, the room collectively held its breath. Caprio nodded respectfully. "Sir, would you like to say something?" The old man's voice trembled, soft but clear. "He laughed at me when I shouted for help." His words broke something invisible in the air. The camera caught Reynolds' face, pale, his confidence now replaced with quiet dread. Caprio's gaze shifted between the two men, compassion and justice intertwining in his silence. The courtroom remained suspended in silence. The elderly man had just taken his seat again, his frail hands folded tightly in his lap. All eyes turned toward Judge Caprio as he adjusted his glasses, his expression calm, yet unmistakably grave. He looked at Daniel Reynolds for a long, unbroken moment. "You laughed?" The question was quiet, but it carried through the room like thunder wrapped in velvet. Reynolds shifted in his seat, the confidence that once filled his voice now reduced to a strained whisper. I don't remember laughing," he muttered, eyes darting away. Caprio leaned slightly forward, his voice steady. "You don't remember? Or you don't want to?" Reynolds opened his mouth, but the words never came. His shoulders sagged under the weight of the judge's tone, firm, not furious, but heavy with meaning. "Mr. Reynolds," Caprio continued, his voice softening, "this court has seen people from every walk of life. Some rich, some poor, some who've lost everything and still walk in here with dignity. What you did wasn't just reckless, it was cruel." The judge's words didn't cut. They peeled back layers of ego like truth made visible. "When you laughed at that man, you weren't mocking his weakness. You were revealing your own." The audience sat frozen. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed louder now. Caprio continued, his tone deliberate, almost fatherly. "You see, wealth can buy comfort, power, even reputation, but it cannot buy character. The law doesn't look at your suit or your salary, it looks at your actions. And in that moment, Mr. Reynolds, yours spoke very clearly." The CEO swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I didn't mean to," he began, but Caprio gently raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No one means to lose their humanity, son. It just slips away, one careless choice at a time." A hush swept across the room. Even the officer from earlier stood taller, his respect for the judge evident in his eyes. Caprio's voice softened again, carrying the calm gravity of experience. "You know, when I was a young man, I watched my father give his last dollar to someone who needed it more. He used to say, 'Humility isn't weakness, it's strength in disguise.'" He paused, his gaze meeting Reynolds. "Tell me, when was the last time you used your strength to lift someone instead of belittle them?" Reynolds didn't answer. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his tie, his breathing shallow. The image of the old man replayed in his mind, the frightened eyes, the trembling cane, his own laughter echoing back like a haunting. The arrogance that had shielded him for years was cracking, and beneath it was something raw. Shame. Judge Caprio leaned back, his tone calm but unyielding. "Justice," he said quietly, "isn't a price tag. It's a mirror." The words hung in the air, profound and piercing. Reynolds looked up, his reflection caught in the polished wood of the defense table. For the first time, he didn't see a CEO. He saw a man who'd lost sight of himself. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock behind the bench. The echo of Judge Caprio's last words, "Justice isn't a price tag, it's a mirror," still hung in the air. Daniel Reynolds sat frozen, his hands clasped, knuckles white against the polished wood. His voice was gone. For the first time, there was no clever defense, no smug reply, just silence. Judge Caprio watched him quietly, his eyes neither stern nor forgiving, just patient. After a long pause, he spoke softly. "Take a breath, son." The words were gentle, but they landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the man's chest. Reynolds inhaled shakily, the sound fragile. He stared down at his reflection in the table, his perfect suit, his trembling hands, his eyes glossed with something unfamiliar. His father's voice echoed faintly in memory. "Never. Forget, Danny. Your worth isn't what you own. It's how you treat people." The image flashed, the two of them fixing an old car together, grease on their hands, laughter in their voices. His father had nothing but pride and principle. Reynolds had everything but peace. A single tear traced the line of his cheek before he quickly wiped it away. "I was raised better than this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I just lost sight of it." Caprio nodded slowly, his tone steady as calm water. "It happens to the best of us," he said. "Success has a way of making the world look smaller, and our egos larger. But humility—" He paused, letting the silence breathe. "Humility restores balance." Reynolds nodded, eyes glistening. "I thought power made me untouchable," he confessed. "I built everything from nothing, and somewhere along the way, I stopped caring who I stepped on." The words fell like stones, heavy and unfiltered. The audience shifted quietly, no longer looking at a villain, but a man unraveling his own pride. Even Officer Daniels lowered his gaze, the old man in the front row offering a faint, almost forgiving smile. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, voice softer than ever. "You know, Mr. Reynolds, the hardest part of being human is admitting when we've forgotten our humanity." The CEO met his eyes, nodding through tears. "I see that now," he murmured. "And I'm sorry. Not just to him." He glanced at the elderly man. but to everyone I've looked down on." Caprio's expression softened further, his hands resting lightly on the bench. "Son," he said, his tone that of a father guiding rather than judging, "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to help you find yourself." The line drew a breath from the room, a quiet tremor of emotion. Reynolds lowered his head, his tears now steady but peaceful. The courtroom wasn't a stage anymore. It was a place of truth. Caprio gave him a moment, saying nothing more. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was healing. The weight of silence lingered in the courtroom, softer now, no longer heavy with judgment, but filled with quiet reflection. Daniel Reynolds sat still, eyes lowered, as if the ground beneath him had finally stopped spinning. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable but calm. "Mr. Reynolds," he began gently, "you've admitted your mistake. You've shown remorse. But the question now is, what comes next?" His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't demand attention. It invited it. Reynolds lifted his eyes, uncertain, as Caprio leaned forward slightly. "Justice isn't about punishment," he continued. "It's about responsibility." The judge's gaze softened, tracing the faces in the room. The officer standing respectfully near the bench, the elderly man watching quietly, and the spectators who had come expecting a simple verdict, but were now witnessing something more. "You nearly took a life," Caprio said softly. "And though I could fine you or sentence you, that wouldn't restore the respect that was lost in your laughter." He paused, his tone deepening. "So instead, I'm ordering something different. You will fund a local crosswalk safety program, education, signage, visibility, everything needed to make sure what almost happened never happens again." The courtroom stirred, whispers spreading like wind through leaves. Reynolds blinked, stunned. "Under whose name?" he asked quietly. Caprio's answer was simple yet profound. "Under his," he said, nodding toward the elderly man in the front row. "Mr. Albert Hayes, the man who forgave you before you ever apologized." Gasps turned into gentle applause, a rare break in courtroom decorum that Caprio did not silence. Even the bailiff smiled faintly, his usual stoicism softened by the rare beauty of justice that healed rather than harmed. Reynolds rose slowly, emotion catching in his throat. He turned toward the old man, walking to him with hesitant steps that carried more humility than any speech could. When he extended his hand, Albert took it without hesitation, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange of forgiveness. "I'm sorry," Reynolds whispered. "I'll make it right." The old man nodded, his voice trembling but kind. "Then it wasn't all for nothing." Judge Caprio leaned back, hands folded in front of him, a faint, knowing smile on his face. "Sometimes," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet, "mercy teaches louder than judgment." The words seemed to settle over the room, like sunlight after rain. Gentle, cleansing, final. Reynolds sat down again, his posture no longer proud but peaceful. The courtroom, once tense and divided, now felt united by something far greater than punishment. Grace. Caprio glanced toward the door, signaling the next case, but for a moment, no one moved. Everyone wanted to hold on to that feeling of justice, humanity, and redemption just a little longer. The courtroom slowly emptied, the echoes of shuffling feet fading into quiet. Papers settled. The old wooden benches creaked one last time before stillness returned. Judge Caprio remained seated, his gavel resting beside him, untouched. The golden afternoon light spilled through the tall windows, catching the dust in gentle motion. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant, his voice soft enough to be mistaken for a thought. "Power without compassion," he murmured, is weakness dressed as strength. The words lingered in the quiet room, honest and unforced. He reached for his glasses, polishing them with the same patience he had shown all day. "We live in a world," he continued, almost as though speaking to the walls, "where people measure success by what they can take. But real success, real power, comes from what we give." His gaze drifted to the courtroom door, where, just minutes ago, a humbled man had walked out transformed. "That young man," Caprio whispered, "came here thinking justice was a battle to be won. He left, knowing it's a lesson to be lived." He smiled faintly, that familiar, quiet smile that spoke of both wisdom and weariness. The city beyond the window stretched wide, its traffic, its chaos, its beauty, all alive with imperfection. "Every person who sits in that chair," he said softly, looking toward the defendant's table, "carries a story. Some filled with pride, others with pain. My job isn't just to weigh the law, but to remind them that mercy still exists in this world." The faint sound of a piano played somewhere in the background, blending with the hum of the city outside. Caprio turned his eyes upward, as if in reflection more than prayer. "If we lose compassion," he said, "we lose everything that makes justice worth fighting for." The light shifted, warming the lines on his face, each one carved by years of listening, guiding, forgiving. He gathered his notes slowly, then looked once more toward the window. The skyline gleamed gold under the setting sun, a city imperfect but redeemable. Caprio's voice lowered to a whisper. "Respect isn't earned by wealth," he said, the words carrying like a benediction. "It's earned by humanity." He set his glasses down, the corners of his mouth curving into that gentle, timeless smile. Outside, the world kept moving. But inside that quiet courtroom, justice and kindness had met once more.